Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 Senior Rally Day. I'm Kevin Perdeville. I'm the Executive Director at Justice and Aging, and I am really pleased to be your MC for today's Senior Rally Day. We're thrilled to have you here. Today's program is organized around the Governor's Master Plan for Aging. The plan was released in January 2021 after a lot of work by stakeholders across the state to influence and inform and develop that plan. Today, we're going to get an update on how implementation is going so far and what's been accomplished so far. And we're going to be learning about opportunities to continue implementation and take us even further towards building a California for all over the remainder of this calendar year. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge our many sponsors and exhibitors. Their support is really crucial to the success of our program today and of the rally. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the legislatures that chose to participate in the rally. Many of them have been part of the rally over many years, going back to when we were doing this in person. And we appreciate the support of each and every one of those legislatures, both for being here today and also for your support of older adults and people with disabilities throughout the year. So let's get started with our program. We have a really great array of speakers. Our first speaker has been a tremendous leader on issues of aging and disability. Kim McCoy-Wade was responsible for leading the process that led to the Master Plan for Aging, and she is now the Senior Advisor on Aging, Disability, and Alzheimer's in the Governor's Office. We're going to hear from Kim for a few minutes, and then at the conclusion of Kim's presentation, you'll have an opportunity to submit questions via the Q&A message box, which is located directly below the video. And once you've entered your questions, please click the blue Send Message box. And after Kim's presentation, we'll have a chance to talk with her about some of your questions. So I'm going to welcome Kim onto the screen here. And Kim, thank you for being with us. And thank you for all of your work. And we look forward to a conversation today.
Good morning. It is so great to be with all of you. I'm a little sorry we're not on the Capitol steps, but I have to report it's one of the windiest days in Sacramento. So I'm actually really happy to be here with you today where we are safe and sound and connected. And, you know, every day is a good day for us to raise our voices and be a leader in California for civil rights and inclusion. But today is especially a great day. So thank you to all of you for raising your voice today and every day, empowering California to leadership. I'm going to be quick and start with some hope and some celebration of things that we have won together. Point to a couple of things that the governor is hoping to continue to lead on. And then I really want to hear from you all about what your priorities are as you go across the street virtually. And questions I'm happy to answer too, but really want to hear from you. So let's just take a minute and celebrate. I know many of you have been working on these issues for decades. You were here through the highs and the lows. You have been here through the cuts and the booms. And so let's just take a moment and celebrate where we are across all 5 goals. So housing, goal 1, we have unprecedented investments in ADUs, which we're seeing pop up all over the state in record numbers, helping families live together, generate income, provide affordable and accessible housing dwelling options so we can all age our way, as our federal government theme is for this year's Older Americans Month. Happy Older Americans Month. We're also seeing targeted investments in 6 beds. You've heard of Project Home Key and Room Key, buying hotels. We're also doing it for 6 beds to provide those community-based residential living options for older and disabled adults. So that is moving out at the hundreds of $1 million level. Goal 2, we could probably talk about forever, but we won't. But let's just take a moment on how healthcare is being transformed in California. More older adults than ever are eligible. Asset tests dropped. And then, of course, starting Sunday, immigration tests dropped. More community services, 13 community services, including respite, falls, transitions from nursing homes covered in Medicaid, enhanced care management covered in Medicaid, alignment with Medicare coming, nursing home carved in to help pay for people to go home and stay home if they can and want to, coming. So just the wholesale transformation of our Medicaid system and duals for Medicare to help people age it where they want to age, in the home they want to age in. That's huge. We couldn't have done it without everyone's support. I'll go quick because there's so much. Goal 3, last year's budget saw 4 different investments in a no wrong door system. How do we help every older adult know where to start? Where do you start when you have questions, want information? We want to have that be as easy as possible for everyone to make that call, check that website, and get connected to what they and their family need. I almost forgot. In healthcare, there's so much. Dementia Aware, California leading the nation in dementia screenings, $25 million, because we know that screening is so important to get folks connected to family support and community support for as good quality of life as possible, as long as possible. I'm going to just do a couple more. Direct care workforce. First ever investments in direct care workforce, led by, again, Susan Damaris at CDA, just like the No Wrong Door system, to make sure we have enough direct care workers, quality care, and quality pay for the important work that it is. Adult protective services. Did you notice the age dropped from 65 to 60? We may need help earlier in life for all kinds of reasons, and APS can be there for us. And last but not least, and I'm just going to stop myself on all the good news, is that we have finally begun to make progress on the basic needs, the universal basic income for older adults, California SSI, SSP. We have got that increased in this January and increase scheduled for January 24. We'll finally get the level for couples up to the federal poverty level. Got some more work to do on individuals, but moving in the right direction. So that's what's been done, and that's what's being implemented by leaders all across the Newsom administration, and it wouldn't have been possible without you and our legislative partners making sure the master plan for aging wasn't a plan that stayed on the shelf, but was powered with budget and policy and implementation to make it real for all of you, all of our families, all of our neighbors, all Californians. So now what? So we have a new budget in January. The governor's got several priorities. And again, I know the legislature does and you do, and I can't wait to have this discussion. Just a few to highlight quickly. Nutrition. You see the Food for All proposal to extend food assistance through the CalFresh program to older adults 55 and over, regardless of immigration. We finished Health for All. Let's turn to Food for All. You see the return to the senior volunteer programs, foster grandparents for intergenerational connections, and senior companion for peer-to-peer. New investments in brain health. Let's prevent dementia and other cognitive decline. You see that proposed. And again, more access to Medicaid and home care services, dropping premiums for working disabled. As more folks are working later, as more disabled people are working, got to make sure healthcare is part of the mix for people continuing to work. So those are just a few of the investments. And of course, older adults are layered into some larger investments on homelessness, larger investments on direct care and home care and healthcare workforce, community workers, but there's more. When you have a 10-year plan to really transform aging in California, there's always more. And I can't wait to hear your priorities and your questions. Let me just give you a couple words of wisdom from what has worked for us the past few years that I have learned from working with all of you, and I hope you take it with you on your virtual visits. 3 tips. We have really worked hard to keep people at the center, people and families. Tell your story. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with secretaries and senators and assembly members that start with us talking about our own aging and our families' aging. So let's keep it centered in person and families. Second, let's let's bake in equity, as we've been told all along from our stakeholders, calling for an equity committee, having an equity tool, equity recommendations. We can do better for all Californians, and that's going to require some targeted investments to people who had employment discrimination when they were growing up, who had criminal justice inequities when they were growing up, who weren't allowed to marry until recently. All kinds of life experiences mean aging is different for all of us, and for all of us to age well, we're going to have some universal and some targeted investments. So remember, California for all, aging for all, equity is baked in. And thirdly, here's probably the most important thing we've learned: leadership matters. We have worked very hard to support and grow and replicate the number of leaders in aging and disability in the administration. You all are growing your movement, growing your community. Many of you are taking that local playbook and doing a master plan for aging in your community, talking to your county board of supervisors, your city council, joining the AARP Age Friendly. Same thing in the legislature. I just got to meet with Assemblymember Nazarian again yesterday. We need 120 Assemblymember Nazarians. We need leaders in every agency, department, in every county and city, in every legislative committee. So I urge you, when you go, be the leader you are and help us grow the community of leaders who are making sure that aging and disability people are included at the table all through their lifespan. And if we do that, if we're at every committee, if we're in every policy, every program, every budget, then we really will have a California way, a California for all, where we age friendly together in the families and communities we choose. So thank you for being here. Thank you for growing our movement. Thank you for powering the master plan. Can't wait to hear your questions and priorities and advice for me. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kim. That obviously a lot going on. So I'm sure that people are going to have questions, and questions are starting to come in. The first question is, Kim, your role in the governor's office is a new role that came out of the master plan for aging process. And so people would love to know, what is your role and how's it going? What are the goals that you have in your new role that relate to older adults and people with disabilities?
Sure. So one of the main things that I try to do is bring the experts from the aging and disability and dementia communities to the administration experts. So if we're having a transportation planning at the transportation cabinet, do we have experts in accessible transportation, in paratransit? If we're having a plan last week released on extreme heat and how California is warming, do we have plans for older adults and how they will navigate the extreme heat and survive the extreme heat? So a lot of what I'm doing now that Secretary Galley has a terrific leadership team in Health and Human Services is looking at those other opportunities in housing, transportation, broadband, climate, disaster services, even education, right? K through 12 and higher ed has a huge implication for people with disabilities and all of us as we age. So trying to do that inclusion work. I think you'll start to see more of that show up as I be here longer in specific initiatives, specific proposals. I think you see it sometimes when some of our outreach, I'm hoping the governor's available to more of you and more of you to listen and to learn from you. But really, it's about lifting up the priorities I hear from you. And I'll just finish with what Dr. Galley taught us and how we did the master plan. Always trying to do two things: targeted investments for aging and disability, and layering in aging and disability in the administration's broadest priorities. So when you see the administration working on housing, climate, and affordability, three of the biggest priorities for our state, how does that have 80-year-olds centered in it as much as 8-year-olds? How does it know that today's 8-year-olds are tomorrow's 80-year-olds? How do we have that age in all of our, so that's a big part of what I'm doing, but really it's connecting. So how can I bring, we need leaders like you at every table. And so thanks to Kevin and Andy Imprado at DRC and Christina Mills at CFILC for helping us make those connections to bring more of you to the table. That's the main job I have.
Great. So we got another question. Speaking of connections, you mentioned hub and spokes. And so there was a question about what that is and how that's different or how it relates to the work of the ADRCs. And we do have Susan coming on. So if you think that's a better question for Susan, we can save it for her. But how would you respond?
Well, for hub and spokes, that just concluded. I would commend you to look at CDA's website for the closeout session on that. I think there were a couple themes that came out of it when I saw that. One is the no wrong door system that, again, CDA is leading, so that, I mean, I ask your neighbor, who do you call when you need some help in adult services? And I bet you'll get a different answer from all of your neighbors. And we need to have that be more accessible in all languages, all cultures. I know who the first place to call is when mom has a fall. I know the first place to call when I'm worried about some cognitive decline for myself or my spouse. We want to make that easy. But the other piece that came out of that is local leadership. How do we strengthen our local leaders, whether that's in the CBO network, in the county network, in health plans, in housing planning and transportation planning? How do we strengthen local leadership so that they have the resources, the capacity, the connections? So we'll be doing some more deep dive on local leadership and aging as we go forward. We all want to be ready for this demographic shift and make sure that we have the leadership support and structures to power California to the future. So more to come on local leadership for sure.
Great. So our next question really compliments you and the team for building a master plan for aging that's really robust and has 5 very ambitious goals, but also notes that even with those 5 goals, there's still, of course, some things that aren't getting all the attention that they could. Issues like transportation are really an even stronger focus on really building a system to provide care to people at home. So what are plans and opportunities for updating the master plan in the future?
Perfect question. So as you may know, it's a 10-year plan. And part of what we did to hold ourselves accountable was start with the 2-year homework assignment. And that 2-year homework assignment had 141 tasks on it that really catalyzed work all over the administration. And I think we give ourselves, a pretty good grade as we say, yes, we started, we made some progress, but absolutely, it's not going to be a A+ 100%. There's more to do. I think the really interesting thing for this community to think about, and I'm so pleased that the Impact Committee that Kevin Prindiville chairs is thinking about this, is what's the right approach for our next homework assignment, for our next 2 years or 4 years that we face, whether we sync it to the legislative cycle or the gubernatorial cycle. What's our next homework? And there is some good thinking about whether another long list of initiatives is the way to go or a more focused list. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Kevin, but the stakeholders have suggested perhaps focusing on some systems, like how do we make sure, we have a child care system, we have a K-12 system. Do we have a home and community care system? We have great programs, great providers, but do we have a true system of care? And that's been a question that's come up. And then, of course, the housing continuum, whether you focus on homelessness, whether you focus on nursing homes, whether you focus on everything in between. How do we make sure those housing choices are there? So I think that's a really, really important conversation that Impact will be advising. What is the right way for the next phase to power action, accountability, and most of all, results for families and communities?
Yeah, that sounds great. We're getting some questions that I think are also ideas for things to focus on moving forward. And people are calling out the need for mental health services to be improved, that's a huge and rising issue, for home care systems to be built in a more ambitious and robust way than we've been able to do so far. Transportation, the need for more funding to shift to older adults as the population is shifting and the age demographics are shifting in the state. But then also questions about how people can be part of this effort. And there's kind of two versions of questions coming in. One is, how can older adults and their families be engaged in these next phases of the master plan? And then also, especially as our folks from the senior legislature today are preparing to talk to legislatures, what's the most effective strategy they can do in promoting budget asks with those legislatures?
Great question. And I'm going to let Susan talk about all the many ways that Together We Engage is coming back, and that we want to do even more and do even better to hear from older adults. Again, hopefully we'll be able to gather in some new ways, have learned some lessons from remote gatherings. So I'll let Susan say how engagement is critical and essential to the master plan ongoing and going forward. I think, what's interesting for our community, if I can just be candid, is we have spent for so long, I came out to California in the early 2000s, and adults programs got, I think the technical term is whacked in the late 2007-8. And we have spent 15, 20 years saying, build us back, build us back, build us back. And we're all really good at saying that. And thank you for saying it for 20 years, right? I guess the question is, what about build it forward? What's our build it forward? And as I sit here inside, it's really helpful to have not just say do more for transportation, but that specific, technical, where do you mean? What do you think of our complete streets investments? Where are we missing? What do you think about the transit investments and the paratransit investments? And can you come to every transportation infrastructure meeting that meets every other, it's a real technical and persistent and consistent. And so I think for us, part of the challenge as a community is moving to develop that capacity and maybe hiring some folks who are transportation experts and who are climate experts, and bringing in people who can fill in the gap between those two expertises. So I think it's there's a lot of opportunity, but it's also time for us to as a community to be ready to meet that moment that's being there. So yes, advocacy, but I think we've got to be ready. And the other thing I'll say, we've got to get a little on my mind a lot is there's some really challenging fiscal pressures for the state, given to be really wonky, but this group can handle it, the GAN limit. and some other things that are coming that are going to put pressures on our state budget as a whole, just as the older population is coming into full force. And so I think we also need to get really sophisticated about funding sources. Sometimes there's payroll tax conversations in this community. We have to really dig in on the wonky revenue, fee, and fiscal side. Sounds like fun, right? So maybe not today. Let's not do that today. But as we plan for the next 2 and 4 years, I think getting even deepening our roots will only strengthen our power and our ability to really make the kind of wholesale changes we want and need to make for our state.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I really appreciate that emphasis on needing to really know the details and be able to bring that technical expertise. And going back to something you shared at the beginning, keeping that connection between those details and the need for all of us, whether we know those details or not, to tell our story. And
that's right. That's right.
To real people, because everybody is aging, everybody is living in families that are aging, and so really need, grounding our work. So even if you don't have today the answer on the GAN limit, getting out there and sharing your story.
100%. You are the expert on your life. You are the expert on your community. You bring that expert, and we need to hear it. So absolutely. And we have time to develop our, oh yes, you want even technical Medicaid question, to call Kevin right now, right? If you have a technical, and as we get into more rooms, we will have more and more Kevins to call, and that'll be great. But for now, you are the expert, and that's what matters, is getting people's passion, commitment, and connection. And we can always follow up with the footnotes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Kim, we're at the end of your time. There are lots more questions coming in, so you're going to continue to hear from us. But thank you for sharing with us your passion, your commitment, your expertise on these issues today and in your role and throughout your time with the Master Plan for Aging. So thank you, Kim, and we'll be talking to you.
I hope so. I'm counting on it. Have a great day. Thanks all.
Thanks, Kim. So next, I'm really pleased to introduce another incredible leader on aging in California. Susan Damaris is the director for the California Department of Aging. At the conclusion of Susan's presentation, we're going to have another opportunity for questions. So you can use the Q&A message box located directly below the video to share questions for Susan. I'll see, we had many questions we didn't get to for Kim, so I'll see if I can bring some of those into the conversation with Susan. Remember that once you've entered your question, you need to click the blue send message box for the question to appear. So Susan, I'm going to welcome you to the stage. Thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Good morning, Kevin, and everybody who's gathered today in the StreamYard instead of on the lawn, instead of on the Capitol lawn. I am joining you from New Orleans, Louisiana, at a national conference where I hope your ears were burning. The Federal Centers for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid Services just presented to us this morning. And unprompted, they were telling the California story about how far we've taken CalAIM and how pioneering and innovative we are in our state. And I couldn't have been prouder. And I'm so happy to follow Kim on this panel and as director of the California Department of Aging. It's great to be here with you this morning. We did prepare some slides that there we are. I was asked to focus in on the Master Plan for Aging and share some items that you can take into your legislative visits. And the first thing you can take is our thanks and gratitude that you signed up for the senior rally today, that you are meeting with legislators and legislative staff, that you're taking the time to do this at such a critical time as we start Older Americans Month, Older Californians Month, and we head into the May revise. It's just so important that you're here today. So thank you for that. We'll go ahead and take a look at the first slide. When you are in your visits, I hope you will convey gratitude to the legislature and the governor for their incredible support for the Master Plan for Aging, as well as historic investments across, as you heard from Kim, all 5 goal areas, and in some key targeted areas that we are just now starting to implement. So we're incredibly grateful to the entire state legislature and the governor for their support in the last 2 years. We'll touch on the Master Plan for Aging. You can really help make sure that the legislature knows that this is a 10-year blueprint for our state, that just because it was launched and it's now being implemented, it's not over, and we need their continued partnership and engagement. I'll touch on the key initiatives that are underway at the Department of Aging. Thank you, whoever asked the question about what we're doing next on our No Wrong Door system. And then I want to allow at least 10 minutes for questions. So we'll go ahead and move to the Master Plan for Aging slide here. In our gratitude too, I did want to share that I since have been confirmed by the Senate. This is a recent update as the director of the Department of Aging. And I was, all of us in the governor's office and the Health and Human Services Agency were just touched by the level of detail and understanding of the questions that were presented. It was just incredibly gratifying to see such deep understanding and knowledge of the work across the aging and disability sectors, as well as the Master Plan for Aging. So that was something we want to convey as well. And there we go. I hope there's no one at the senior rally today who has not seen all 5 bold goals of the Master Plan for Aging. But if you have not, here is a refresher for you. And I know that you'll be touching on all of these topics in your legislative meetings today. Next slide. There we go. Many of you joined us in January when the governor and Secretary Galley and other secretaries marked the 1-year anniversary of the Master Plan for Aging. We were joined by the legislature that made this possible. It started with Senator Hannah Beth Jackson. Then Governor Newsom issued his executive order, and the rest is history. We were so proud to share the results in just the first year. We've made record progress in record time here in our state, and the message that the governor and the secretary conveyed and I share is together we're just getting started. Next slide. So we've touched a little bit on the record investments in the aging and disability area across multiple agencies and departments, a number of legislative bills that were signed into law by the governor at the close of last year. So as we're marking the first 2 years of the 132 initiatives, we have a lot of progress that we've already marked, and I know that there will be more budget investments and more chaptered legislation this summer and into September, so that when we wrap up the first 2 years of the master plan, we will have a long record of achievements that we all share in that success. Kim touched on stakeholder ways that individuals can be involved, and the accountability piece of the Master Plan for Aging is very robust. We currently have 7 stakeholder groups that have been formed. They are all meeting quarterly and all representative of individuals from throughout the state, bringing diverse perspectives, a variety of expertise, subject matter expertise. You heard mention of the Impact Stakeholder Committee. This is the group that holds the master plan closest to make sure that we stay on task and on time and deliver the results that stakeholders expect from the Master Plan for Aging. Kevin Prindiville is a member of that group, and there are 7 others who are leading us. We also have the Equity and Aging Advisory Committee. This was one of the first work groups formed as part of the master plan, and it was made permanent. We also expanded its membership to broaden the focus of the Equity and Aging Advisory Committee to make sure it was fully inclusive of all perspectives. We have the Disability and Aging Community Living Advisory Committee, DACLAC. This formerly was the Olmsted Advisory Committee, and it has a new look and feel, as well as new representation. About 30 members of that group. We have the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders Advisory Committee, about 20 members appointed to that group, including individuals living with Alzheimer's disease, family caregivers, researchers, physicians, community-based providers. Our most recent, I skipped over the Elder and Disability Justice Coordinating Council that was established jointly between the Health and Human Services Agency and the Department of Justice in January. Their first order of business is a landscape and an equity roadmap for elder and disability justice. And our most recent group is the Aging and Disability Research Partnership that will own the the Master Plan for Aging's data dashboard and look at other opportunities to pull in data and research. And then I wanted to be sure that the California Commission on Aging, a stalwart partner in all of this work, is included in this list. Next slide. So the key initiatives at the Department of Aging right now focus on two areas. We are partners within the Health and Human Services Agency and the Labor and Workforce Development Agency in the more than nearly $1 billion invested in direct care workforce last year, and proposed $1.7 billion more in the current budget. And I just want to make the direct link. I'm sure you all know it, but this covers the entire continuum from home care, in-home supportive services, certified nurse aides working in assisted living and skilled nursing facilities, community health workers, and now has broadened to include social workers and nurses, and aging and disability services. If we're going to build that home and community-based services system that we want and need, will rely on all of these job types. So workforce is critical to our future HCBS system. Next slide. We're also very proud of the legislature's support and the funding made available through federal and state sources to expand the Aging and Disability Resource Connection Network. We now have 15 designated in our state, 9 are emerging, and we passed a critical threshold where more than half of our state's counties and half of our population are covered by an Aging and Disability Resource Connection. They will be central to our state's No Wrong Door system. Next. All right. So good. I wanted to make sure we allowed plenty of time for questions. Here's how you can follow up to learn more about anything I mentioned about the Master Plan for Aging and to share your ideas. I will close with one final point. On September 20th, we are partnering statewide. Philanthropic partners have generously offered to host a statewide convening in Sacramento. This will be similar to what a White House Conference on Aging might have been at the federal level, and we will have an aging and disability convening. All are invited, and because of our philanthropic partners, there will be no cost to attend. And we will celebrate our 2 years of achievements, and we will spend the focus of that day looking ahead, as Kim said, looking forward to what we want to achieve in the next 2 years with the Master Plan for Aging. You will all be invited to Cal for All on September 20th. And now I will take any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan, for the presentation and for all of your great work. It's always good to see you. I have some questions from the last speaker, Kim, that I think are also relevant to you. And then we've got new questions coming in just for you. One of the questions was about how this plan is very forward-looking and it's about the future. And so that the question, person asking the question then thought technology. How is the plan thinking about leveraging technology to meet the needs of an aging state?
Thanks for that question. If you look through all of the recommendations, I would guess that technology doesn't appear very often as a specific recommendation. I can speak to the Department of Aging and efforts that we have underway. We're building out for the first time ever a CRM system that will be integrate the data for all of our area agencies on aging, our aging and disability resource connections, our independent living centers, and we'll have interoperability with the Medi-Cal program. So that's a huge investment in technology to provide the back-end support for the system that we envision. In addition to that, we have the digital divide. There have been investments and continued investments in broadband capability, in devices, in training older adults and people with disabilities how to use the devices. So that's a way that technology has appeared. And I'm sure there are others, the distribution of laptops, devices, robotic pets, Telehealth is absolutely something that we see more in the Health Reimagined in the Medi-Cal and Medicare space.
Great. You and Kim both spoke about equity and how important equity is to the master plan and to Aging California. One of our questioners was talking about a program they've put together that's about training and outreach for LGBTQ older adults, and specifically the link between that community and Alzheimer's and dementia. For people that are working on these very equity-specific and population-specific programs, how do they partner with CDA to bring those programs to scale?
Here at this conference in New Orleans, I served on an equity panel yesterday with SAGE, and we hatched a plan to have a webinar in June during Pride Month to share all of the resources that are available, not just through CDA, but other state departments like the Department of Public Health that provide a lot of health education and outreach to support our network. That's just one example, but CDA at the Department of Aging, we're definitely looking at how we can play more of a lead role in sharing convening our partners, sharing best practices, and providing more of a learning culture for the network. One way that we're doing that is with our Wednesday webinars. So we've got one coming up tomorrow, first Wednesday of every month. We're going in depth on the policy and financing of the master plan initiatives. Tomorrow we'll focus on age and disability friendly health systems. So you can look for more of that to come. Absolutely. We also will be hiring our first chief equity officer at the California Department of Aging this summer. And I think things will really take off when that person joins us. We can't wait.
Great. We're getting lots of questions about people who don't qualify because of eligibility, income and asset eligibility for IHSS or Medi-Cal. So they've got Medicare, but they otherwise don't have programs that help them meet their needs around long-term care and other healthcare issues. So how is the plan thinking about building supports for that community of older people in California?
That's a huge area of concern, what is often deemed the missing middle, individuals who don't yet qualify for Medi-Cal and may not have the resources to self-fund all of their care, especially home care and things that aren't covered by Medicare. So that is one of the goal areas. In Goal 5, we begin to tackle affordability. It's something I'm very proud of at the Department of Aging, that the area agencies on aging and the Aging and Disability Resource Connections serve anyone regardless of ability to pay. And that's why it's so important that we have a no wrong door system where everyone can get started. And it's not limited only to individuals who are eligible for Medi-Cal or Medicare, that it's a starting point for everyone to get directed to what they need. That doesn't solve for how it's paid for. And that's something that I would expect in future years of the master plan will be a key focus area and an area of great attention. And it will take a collaborative approach across, as Kim mentioned, with leadership from the top and the bottom up to really hear those stories about what people are paying for, how much it costs, and the burden that it's placing on families across our state.
So we had a technical question about one of your slides around the workforce initiative. What does the 25 by 25 refer to? What's that idea?
So the 25 by 25 is, can we go back to that slide, Maria? It is the, I can't recall if it's the social workers or the community health workers. Yes, it is It is setting a target of the year 2025 to have 25,000, I believe, community health workers. I will fact check that for you. And this is key that we're looking to expand community health workers. It ties, closest to the community, most focused on equity, really helpful with helping people navigate the system, helping advocate for the older adult and the person with disability. And there's a lot of focus on including that, making sure that the older adult and disability populations are included in all of the work around community health workers, which started last year when Medi-Cal made that job category eligible for Medi-Cal reimbursement.
Great. Well, we have questions flying in right now, but we're at the end of your time, Susan. But I'll call out a couple things. Lots of chatter today about transportation and the need to build specific transportation opportunities for older adults. Lots of questions about that missing middle group and how to leverage Medicare to serve them. Questions about the hubs and spokes and ADRCs. And so there's a lot of energy and interest and issues for you always to be working on, Susan. And we appreciate you taking on the task of serving as the director of the department and for all of your advocacy there and in the past. So thanks for being with us and thanks for your leadership.
Thank you, Kevin. And we're up for the challenge. We're here for it. Our team at CDA and our partners across the Health and Human Services Agency, we're just getting started. So looking forward to working with all of you.
Well, thank you, Susan. So are we. Our next speaker is one of Susan's colleagues at the Department of Aging. Adam Willoughby is the Assistant Director for Legislation and Public Affairs at the California Department of Aging. Adam's going to provide an update on the governor's 2022-2023 budget and its impact on older Californians. At the conclusion of Adam's presentation, his contact information will be displayed at the bottom of the screen for those that would like to follow up directly with Adam. We're not going to have a Q&A with Adam, but you'll be able to get in touch with him afterwards. So Adam, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. And good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you all today. As Kevin mentioned, I'm the Assistant Director for Legislative Affairs here at the Department of Aging. Would also like to take a quick moment to thank John and Janice for all of their work in organizing this senior rally today, which for anyone that's counting is the 7th consecutive year that this event has taken place, the first one being in 2015 in the West Steps of the Capitol. Probably a good thing that we're not there today, given how windy it is. So let's see, Maria, can we, there we go. So I have a number of slides here. Can we go to the next one? Great, so as Kevin alluded to, I have been asked to talk about budget investments that have been made to the Department of Aging, and some of the specific topics that I'm going to go through include the 2021-22 Budget Act investments, as well as implementation. I'll talk about our HCBS, or Home and Community-Based Services funding package, as well as the 2022-23 governor's budget, which is under consideration right now by the legislature. Okay, thank you. So this first slide, I just want to start by emphasizing the enormous federal support that the Department of Aging received in the 21-22 budget. We received hundreds of millions of dollars for a variety of enhanced services and supports through a combination of a number of federal COVID stimulus programs. So the Families First, Coronavirus Response Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and the American Rescue Plan. So this was by far the largest budget that the Department of Aging has ever seen. And I will just caveat by saying on the slide here, you see it's, $803 million. This is, due in large part to these federal supports, which is why it is so very high. But I just wanted to take a moment to emphasize how much money we received last year. Next slide. Okay, so given the large investments that we received last year, the legislature was keenly interested to understand how these dollars are being invested. And so on this slide, these are some of the investments that we emphasized to the legislature in our budget subcommittee hearings that we had in February and March of this year. And then to clarify, these are all general fund except for the CalFresh that you see there, which is a reimbursement from Department of Social Services. So I'll just go through these here fairly quickly. So the top one, Master Plan for Aging, that you see there, you see the 20 positions that are noted. These positions are going to support the implementation of the master plan and will be largely under a new division that we have recently stood up here at the department called our Division of Aging Policy, Research, and Equity. And that's being led by Sarah Steenhausen, who I'm sure many of you know. And so these positions are going to include policy analysts, support staff, data and research specialists, and we're currently in the process of recruiting for these positions. And, I just want to underscore the importance of these positions coming to CDA. CDA is a small department. We, in the last month or so, just hired our 200th employee. And so, these positions are going to ensure that the master plan is sort of sustainable, and we have people that can do the work over the long term. Okay. So the next investment that I'll highlight is the Office of the Long-Term Care Patient Representative. So this office was created by trailer bill language in last year's budget process. There was also a policy bill by Senator Pan that would have done essentially the same thing. And so CDA recently appointed a new assistant director for this office, who some of you may know as well, Susan Rodriguez, in January to lead and implement this office. And so next, CDA is going to be recruiting and hiring and onboarding the other 6 positions that you see noted there. And we're also in the process of developing contract language and working with stakeholders to sort of develop this program at the local level. Okay. So the next is ADRC, Aging and Disability Resource Connection. We're working on allocating these infrastructure grants to both designated and emerging ADRCs to help them grow and expand, as you heard Susan mention in the previous panel. And we're also using some of these dollars to procure a new IT system, also something that Susan mentioned, our CRM, or our client relationship management. And what we think this will be able to do is sort of serve as a consistent platform across ADRCs to do things like client contacts, service and referral, and provide statewide data on ADRC services and volumes. And then finally, the CalFresh expansion. So we're using these funds to provide primarily to our AAAs and their service providers to in turn provide outreach and CalFresh application assistance. That includes things like one-on-one assistance in completing the applications and overcoming any challenges with technology that folks may have in completing the application. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so, I too would like to echo Kim's and Susan's thanks and appreciation to the legislature, both for their leadership and support of aging-related investments. And that's what you see here on this slide. So these are a few of the investments that the legislature led on last year. And so, so what they did is they provided some ongoing administrative support and funding for the AAAs, and they restored some MSSP slots. So our multi-purpose senior services program, we saw a reduction in the number of slots in this program and the economic downturns in 2008 and 2011. And so this investment allowed us to increase the number of slots from about 9,400 up to almost 12,000 today. They also provided for increased ongoing support of senior nutrition, which is CDA's largest program, both by dollars and number of participants. And so these nutrition augmentations have had a notable impact on the ability of the AAAs and their service providers to serve additional people, additional meals during the pandemic. And so I have some numbers here. So in calendar year 2019, the AAAs and their providers were able to serve 18 million meals. Okay, so coming to 2021, the network was able to serve an additional 9.5 million meals for a total of 27.5 million. And then for calendar year 2022, we think that we are on track to serve an additional 4.5 million meals, which would come to 32 million meals. So you can see how these investments made by the legislature are having a real impact in people's lives. And so in addition to the state augmentation, the AAA networks also received some additional federal one-time pandemic funding to support nutrition infrastructure, such as things like freezers and kitchen equipment and food delivery vehicles. Okay, next slide. So home and community-based services. We know that California's older adult population was the first demographic to be asked to stay at home due to their high risk of death from COVID-19. And since that population has been home, the need for services that are specific to things like isolation, health, and well-being have increased, right? And so as a result, the legislature and the federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services approved some one-time spending in the amount of approximately $3 billion in total for the state of California to be spent over 3 years. And so a large portion of this plan is intended to strengthen older adults' recovery and resilience from the isolation that they experienced when they were staying home as a result of the pandemic. And so that's what you see here on this slide. And I'm going to go through and highlight a number of these items. So the first one I'll highlight is the access to technology for seniors and persons with disability. This is a $50 million one time. You heard this question alluded to during Susan's presentation, but the purpose of this program is to provide grants to County Human Services Agency to increase access to technology for older adults and adults with disabilities to help reduce isolation, increase connections, and enhance self-confidence. And so among other things, this program is going to distribute technology devices like iPads, home smart speakers, along with training and service. And so right now, we are working with the County Welfare Directors Association to develop some grant methodologies and grant requirements to roll these dollars out and get these devices out in the community. The next investment I'll highlight is the adult family homes for older adults. So this is $9 million one-time federal funding, and then about $2 million ongoing state general fund. And so this program is modeled after Department of Developmental Services, their family home agency program. And what it's going to seek to do is pair older adults with a family to live in their home and do things like share in the interaction and responsibilities of being part of the family unit. And then in turn, the family is going to receive a stipend and support from the program in return for caring for the older adult. And so we have recently hired a lead for this program. Her name is Sandra Bannerman. She started a couple of weeks ago, and so we're well underway working with DDS to hopefully launch this program later this year. The next investment I'll mention, let's go back to the previous slide. Sorry, not quite done yet, is the direct care workforce. So this is non-IHSS workforce training and stipends. You heard Ken mention this earlier. So this is by far the largest dollar amount investment that's coming to CDA. This is $150 million. And so this program's all about building our non-IHSS care workforce to make sure that we have enough workers to care for us as we age, right? And so we want to do things like making sure that these jobs they have adequate compensation. They have things like training opportunities, career and wage ladders, and these classifications are going to include workers like social workers, personal care assistants, and they're also going to leverage some of our existing programs, such as our CBAS, our MSSP, our PACE program, and others. And so right now we are developing the framework and implementation for this program, along with a number of other departments, Department of Social Services, Department of Healthcare Services, and Department of Healthcare Access and Information, formerly known as OSHPD. And we're actively interviewing candidates right now that would lead this initiative, which would also be housed under the DAPRI division, as we call it, the Division of Aging, Policy Research, and Equity. And then finally, I'll highlight the Senior Nutrition Grant Program. We received roughly $38 million to provide grants to our AAAs and their respective nutrition providers. Again, these dollars are intended to be used to purchase things like commercial kitchens, dishwashers, sinks, refrigeration and heating equipment, food delivery trucks, vehicles, all in the spirit of allowing the providers to sort of keep pace with the higher demand for home delivered meals and congregate meals as we began to transition back into in-person settings. Okay, next slide. So 2022-23 governor's budget. As I mentioned earlier, this budget is, it's under consideration by the legislature right now. It will be out, the May revise will be out by the 15th. And so, I can highlight a couple of BCPs that we submitted and that were approved to be included in this budget. And first I'll note that, this budget continues on the investments that were made in last year's budget, which of course we all know was historic, right? And so, this budget builds off and continues those investments. And so, so the first BCP that we had approved was some additional staff to help again with implementation of the master plan for aging. So this is going to be some data staff, some policy staff, some research staff, an equity lead, as you heard Susan mention earlier, as well as staff to engage more with our tribal communities in the state of California. The next one is for some administrative resources, right? So this would be 4 positions in our human resources branch and our business management to support the growth of the department. People don't realize that recruiting, hiring is very time intensive for state employees. So given all this growth that we're experiencing at the department, it's important that we also support our HR department, right? That does the bulk of this work to onboard people. And then finally, some technical adjustments. So we are currently funding 8 positions out of what we call our blanket. These are dollars that we save by not spending them on other authorized positions that we have. And so this BCP would just be a technical adjustment to make those positions permanent. Okay, so that sort of concludes my presentation. I hope it was informative. Again, really just appreciate this opportunity to be with you all. My contact information is here. If you'd like to send me any comments or have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I guess with that, I'll turn it back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Adam. We did get a lot of questions during your talk, so you'll be hearing from people, I'm sure. Thanks for sharing your contact information. Our next speaker is Maria Kalina. Maria is the Executive Director of the California Collaborative for Long-Term Services and Supports. The Collaborative is the premier sponsor for the 2022 Senior Rally. The Collaborative's strong involvement and sponsorship of this annual event is greatly, greatly appreciated.
An absolute honor to be here representing the California Collaborative for Long-Term Services and Supports, a network of nearly 60 statewide and regional organizations working to advance the dignity, health, and independence of older and disabled Californians. On behalf of the Collaborative, I want to thank the organizers of this event. We're delighted to be part of Senior Rally Day. This past year has been truly remarkable. For me, it was marked by tremendous progress. We witnessed unprecedented investments in California's supportive services for older and disabled adults. We witnessed the appointment of a governor's senior advisor on aging, disability, and Alzheimer's, and the recruitment of some of our most knowledgeable colleagues to key administrative positions. We witnessed the launch of numerous initiatives aimed at coordinating and strengthening the state's fractured system of care, CalAIM, statewide expansion of aging and disability resource connections, a new LTSS dashboard that will help us paint a better picture of utilization, quality, and cost, path funding, new Office of Medicare Innovation and Integration, and maybe most notably, we witnessed the historic release of the Master Plan for Aging, which was developed with robust stakeholder input from many of the talented and passionate individuals here today. And although we still call it the Governor's Master Plan for Aging, I think of it fondly as a stakeholder's Master Plan for Aging. I wanted to highlight something that I've been thinking a lot about this year. I started working on aging and disability issues in 2011, right at the inception of the Collaborative. And as far back as I can remember, we've been looking ahead to the year 2030. Let me share some data points with you that may sound familiar. By 2030, 1 in 4 Californians will be 60 or older. By 2030, the number of disabled older adults will increase by 160%. By 2030, there will be an 88% increase in the number of seniors with self-care limitations. And the data points that utilize this marker of 2030 go on and on. But the reality is that 2030 is now. It's not a faraway moment in time. 2030 is not in the distant future. We have less than a decade until these data points become a lived reality. And while we made great progress last year, the reality is that in 2022, California has the second highest rate of poverty among older adults in the country. The rising costs of housing, health, and care leave our seniors and disabled adults scrambling to meet basic needs. And as a result of shrinking affordability, they're at the center of the state's housing and homelessness crisis, with people over 50 now accounting for almost half of all unhoused adults in the state. Adults with disabilities continue to be the most likely population to experience homelessness and continue to face the highest rates of housing discrimination. In 2022, demand for health and caregiving professionals is rising parallel to a caregiver workforce shortage, which is adding pressure to an already stressed network of care. Too many of our older and disabled adults are living without access to the direct care that they need. And this isn't just a challenge with access to care, it's an issue of equity. Direct care workers are largely women, many of whom are immigrants. They earn less than half of California's median annual income, and a quarter fall below the federal poverty line. We don't value our direct caregiving workforce in the same way that we value other professionals. And then there's unpaid family caregivers who are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Asian American women who often have to juggle between caring for a loved one, raising children, going to work, affording skyrocketing out-of-pocket costs, and they're doing all of this with very little support and training. And in 2022, California still has a fractured and underfunded system of care with a patchwork of programs and services that's inequitable and difficult to navigate, particularly in our rural and underserved communities. It's no secret that this fractured system results in poorer health outcomes, increased likelihood of unnecessary institutionalization, and higher costs. So while we made great progress last year, this isn't the time to celebrate. Not yet. There's still too much work to do. The Master Plan for Aging encourages us to think about aging more broadly, and I would like to encourage us to think about aging as a lifetime experience. I'm an only child with aging parents who will likely need care in the next decade, maybe two. My extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins live in the Ukraine, so I know the responsibility of caregiving and navigating the system will fall to me. And meanwhile, I'm also aging. And my children, who are projected to live to a median age of 100, are aging, hopefully not too fast. And as we age, as we all experience aging, I hope we can do so with dignity, health, and independence. I hope that we can afford to do so in the setting of our choice with the supports we need, free from abuse and neglect. And this is why the Master Plan for Aging matters, because it moves us towards that vision. Not just for the older and disabled adults of today, but for everyone who is on this journey of growing older. The Master Plan for Aging is our collective voice. And now that we have a voice, it's our collective responsibility to make sure that it carries. It is our responsibility to work in tandem with each other and with California's leadership to hold each other accountable so that we can ensure that the Stakeholders Master Plan for Aging results in real, tangible systems transformation, that California's older and disabled adults can experience our collective vision for a healthy and equitable California for all ages and abilities. And we're really just at the beginning of this journey. There is a lot of challenging work ahead of us to make this dream a reality, and it'll take our entire community to drive this vision forward. And tomorrow, collaborative members will be meeting with over 55 policymakers to highlight the Master Plan for Aging and uplift 3 critical issues facing our population, including the caregiver workforce crisis, affordability in housing, and systems coordination. So let's get to work. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maria, for those inspired comments and for your leadership and support of the Senior Rally Day today. Our next speaker is Sarah Steenhausen. Sarah is the Deputy Director for Aging Policy, Research, and Equity at the California Department of Aging. Sarah is going to be moderating a panel discussion of the Master Plan for Aging, and the focus of the panel is going to be on year 2 and beyond. At the conclusion of the panel discussion, you'll have an opportunity again to submit questions via the Q&A message box. Again, it's going to be located directly below the video. Once you have entered your question, please remember to click the blue send message box to get those questions to Sarah and to the rest of the panel. So welcome, Sarah. Great to have you here today.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. What an honor it is to be here with all of you today. Before we get started, I'd love to introduce our wonderful panel that's here to provide some really important perspectives on the Master Plan for Aging and moving forward beyond year 2. So first, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Brown, former Assembly member and a member of the California Commission on Aging. And we have Andy Imparato, who is Executive Director of Disability Rights California. Hi, Andy. Nice to see you. We have Debbie Toth, who is CEO of Choice in Aging. And then finally, last but not least, we have Liz Fuller, who is the Chief consultant of the Assembly Committee on Aging and Long-Term Care. So welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that you all were able to be here because each of you in your own right operates in a very important space in our master plan efforts. Andy and Debbie as really powerful advocates in the aging and disability space, but also with a wealth of policy knowledge on your own. And Debbie, of course, as experience as a provider on the ground in the community. And Liz with a just wealth of experience in the legislature as a longtime staffer and now key consultant on these issues and really spearheading advocacy internally in the legislature. So each of you really has some important perspectives to offer. And what I'm going to do is just provide a few context setting slides to help frame our discussion. And then at the end, we are anticipating to hear from Assemblymember Cheryl Brown, who will kind of be our, the call to action speaker at the end of the panel to help wrap it all up together. So thank you all for being here. If we could pull up the slides. So I don't need to repeat a lot of this. We know that the Master Plan for Aging was the very important step forward in identifying a broad, sweeping range of initiatives across 5 goals to achieve a California for all ages and abilities by the year 2030. Next slide. We've reflected on the fact that there's been tremendous progress in year 1 through a series of investments, through legislation, through efforts to implement the resources and the legislation across the administration's partners and in partnership with our public and private sector. And then finally, and importantly, accountability with our stakeholder engagement and with our data dashboard on aging so that we can measure progress. So it's important to think about how we did this past year and look at our progress, but it's also very important to look forward. And that's what our opportunity today is. Next slide. So I want to just call your attention to the first annual progress report. That is a very comprehensive compilation of all of the progress across initiatives in the first year of implementation. And that can help inform your thinking as we move forward. Next slide, please. I think what's really important at this point to think about the road ahead and in the conversation we're about to have with our key partners, really thinking about the values that drive our efforts in the master plan over the next 10 years. So rooting everything we do in equity, as Kim said, we need to ensure that we apply that equity lens to all policies and all issues that we drive. Second, we need to focus on inclusivity and on bridging aging and disability. California has done a remarkable job through stakeholder leaders at bringing together our aging and disability partners because we need to reframe how we look at aging and how we look at disability so that we change the paradigm and fight ageism and fight ableism in our state, along with racism and all the other isms. Third, we need to listen. We need to listen to one another, and the state always needs to listen to the consumers and the stakeholders to inform our understanding of the work that we have to do. We have to rely on partnerships. We can't do this alone. No one sector can do it alone. We all have an important role to play. Also with that comes leadership. And I know that there was a huge emphasis on the importance of leadership in the development of the plan, which was critical. But I think what's important to point out is that we all have to act as leaders in this space, the state, the legislature, and the stakeholders who are responsible for doing the hard work on the ground level, but also informing our own understanding of what needs to change and putting the hard work in to propose the policies and initiatives that we need to consider. We need to focus on silo busting, working across sectors, not looking at things from just our narrow perspective, but working with untraditional partners that we might not traditionally have always engaged. And we all need to remain engaged at the state and local level so that we hear from the people who are impacted most by these policies. And then finally, we need to remain nimble. And why it's important to be nimble right now is, as Kim was saying, we're going to be focusing on updating the plan every 2 years. So we have to be very flexible in understanding that, things change over the years, and we need to make this plan a living document so that we react to the realities on the ground every day. So these are really the values that I see as framing our work moving forward, and I look forward to a discussion that hits on these different themes. Next slide, please. I just wanted to again plug, Susan talked about this, but this is our California for All Ages and Abilities Day of Action. And we want all of you there. We are ready to re-envision equity, aging, disability, and you as part of it all. It's going to be a really important opportunity to have your voice heard, for us all to meet in person in Sacramento. And again, we are truly grateful to our foundation partners for helping us support this event. So now I'd like to turn to bring up the panelists, please. Hi, Andy. Hello, Debbie. Hello, Liz. And super excited to just get into it because each of you has so much to contribute to this discussion. And Debbie, I'm going to start with you. Debbie, you're as CEO, Choice in Aging, you see firsthand the challenges impacting older adults and people with disabilities, particularly low-income communities of colors, including Black, Latino, Indigenous, and Asian and Pacific Islander communities, all the communities that were the most impacted by COVID. So you understand what it takes to develop programs that meet the needs of these populations. And you really occupy a unique space in state advocacy because you can translate what you see on the ground into state policy opportunities. So what I'd love to start with you is, from your vantage point, what do you see as the most pressing issues for us to address in years 2 to 5 of the MPA implementation? Where are we falling short, and what should our highest priorities be?
Well, that's just a small question, right? So thank you so much for inviting that question. Yes, it is a unique space to be an advocate, to navigate policy, advocacy, and provide programs and services. And I think that everybody should do it. I think it gives us better grounding. I would be remiss if I didn't say accessible transportation needs to be a top priority for our state. That's been true for 30 years. But what I really want to focus on today, what is preventing us from meeting really the idea and the ideals of the master plan for aging, are workforce issues, plain and simple. So we have adult day healthcare programs. You heard discussion about the multipurpose senior services program, CBAS, community-based adult services, which is adult day healthcare. You heard these programs mentioned, and these programs exist to keep people out of skilled nursing facilities and allow them to age with dignity in their setting of choice. And we can't bring more people in, even though we're open, even though we're masked and we're distant and we're safe and we're sanitizing and we're doing all the things. We have long wait lists of people who want to come back to our adult day healthcare programs, but we don't have enough staff. So we have to be able to support people in that adult day healthcare setting. We have the skilled nursing staff, the same staff as in a skilled nursing facility, and we help people with activities and exercise and eating and ambulating and doing all kinds of fun things. But if you don't have staff there to support and keep people safe, you can't bring people into the programs that help keep them out of costlier care settings and places they don't necessarily want to be. So also of note is that the folks who work in these jobs are making just above minimum wage, because as we heard, there's all this investing going on, but there's not a lot of investment in this particular workforce, in the direct care workforce, in the historically women workforce, in the historically women of color workforce. So we need to invest not just in developing this workforce, but we need to invest in a rate of pay that allows for them to not work more than one job, that allows for them to be honored. This is such an incredible honor to work with this population, and we don't elevate that in our society, and we don't lift that up, and we absolutely need to. So we need to sort of re-envision how we develop this workforce, how we pay this workforce, and how we ensure that we have parity in investment in this workforce as in other places. As we heard Maria say, you have 1 in 4 people who are going to be 60 and over by 2030. We've got work to do in this department. Like, this is where we can really focus a lot of our energy and effort. And I'm going to stop speaking on that point right there so that Andy doesn't have to virtually kick me to be quiet.
We would always love to hear from you, Debbie. There's just lots to talk about. So I really appreciate what I heard from you is first and foremost, most critical issue, workforce, particularly our direct care workers who, as we all know, are not paid nearly what they should be. First, to have a living wage, but also to honor the tremendous work that they're doing. So without workers, you don't have programs. We can invest, but if you don't have the people to provide the services, forget it. So that is a great segue for me to turn to you, Andy. For years, Andy, the aging and disability communities have seen one another as competitors or sometimes as others. And it's really, I think, it's impacted our ability of both communities to achieve wholesale system change and realize our common interests and struggles. And you, as a member of the Master Plan for Aging Stakeholder Advisory Committee and in your role as Executive Director of Disability Rights California, you led efforts over the past year and a half to build strong advocacy, aligning aging and disability. Can you discuss why this partnership is so critical and what we must do to elevate both aging and disability together as we move forward with MPA implementation?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well,
Perfect.
it's great. It's great to be with you all, and I hope we can get Cheryl Brown on the screen because I'm excited to see Cheryl. But what I would say, and we talked about this a lot on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, is that you can't really do aging policy well without thinking about the disability issues that are embedded in it, and you can't do disability policy well without thinking about the aging issues that are embedded in it. So if you think about the direct support workforce, it is a front and center issue for people in California as we age, but it's also a front and center issue for people with disabilities across the age spectrum. The workforce, direct support workforce issues affect families with children with disabilities. They affect adults with disabilities who are trying to participate in the labor force or participate fully in the community. And people with disabilities experience a greater need for the direct support workforce as we get older. So I think that whether the issue is transportation, access to housing, access to healthcare, you name the issue, there's a disability angle, there's an aging angle, and when those two angles are thought about together, along with all of the other equity issues, we make better policy. So I was excited. I've been doing disability advocacy for over 30 years. My experience on the Master Plan Stakeholder Committee was one of the best experiences that I've had in terms of the relationship building that obviously is continuing. Kevin Prindiville is an extraordinary leader, extraordinary mind. He learned a lot about disability, and he's bringing that with him at the national level, at the state level. Debbie, we think of her as part of the disability community, part of the disability movement. So these cross relationships to me are critically important. And I do think just on the disability side, we have to do a better job talking about and thinking about aging as part of disability policy and part of our community, because people do. I'm a 56-year-old with bipolar disorder who's been living with my symptoms since I was in my 20s. And, the isolation that I and others have experienced during this pandemic definitely affected my mental health. For me, working on the master plan was an antidepressant. Anybody just being around Debbie Toth is an antidepressant. So I encourage us to really think about how do we keep these relationships going? How do we build a movement that is intersectional and is across the age spectrum and is intergenerational? And to the extent that aging advocates need to be fluent in disability, we need to help them do that. I know a lot of people are afraid to say the wrong thing. Well, we can help break that down, and we can also not react so strongly when somebody uses the word handicap or some other word that doesn't reflect political correctness or being exposed to other language. So again, for me, I think California is leading the country. I think people in Washington, D.C., where I was for 26 years, are inspired by what we did with the Master Plan for Aging and the coalition work around it. And I think the Administration for Community Living at the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level wants to lift up what we're doing in California and encourage other states to do the same.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Such great themes that you're calling out. The importance of just building relationships. And I think, at least what I witnessed kind of from in the engagement through the master plan stakeholder process, is that building relationships does not mean everybody always agrees with one another at all. In fact, it means that you can disagree and listen, and maybe positions don't change, but there's a respect, and I think that with that then comes trust, and then you're able to figure out where you can align and work together and how to work through the differences, right? So I feel like it's a continual process, and if there's that key commitment to sustaining relationships, it really will take us all very far. So
Sarah,
thank you for that.
Can I just do a quick follow-up? I just want to lift up one example of what you're talking about. We worked hard on the Community Vaccine Advisory Committee for the state of California in helping the state figure out who to prioritize for vaccines. And at one point during the debate, the state was leaning towards prioritizing people who were over a certain age before they prioritized high-risk people who were under that age. And we reached out to the Aging Coalition that we had worked with on the master plan and said, we'd love for you to weigh in and say that people under 65 who are high risk deserve to be prioritized at the same time and alongside people who are over 65. And we got a letter that had over 20 sign-ons. And I remember just reading the sign-ons, and it made me cry because I had never seen that kind of solidarity across aging and disability. So that's just an example where those relationships really pay off.
Yeah, thank you. That is the exact example I was thinking of too when I made that point about disagreeing and working through the difficult issues, because they are difficult, and we're not going to get through them and build better policy if we don't have those healthy and important conversations. So thank you for that. So now I'm super happy to turn it to my amazing colleague, Liz Fuller, who has just in a few years become an aging expert, who previously spent her years in women's issues and family issues. So yes, Liz, you are an aging expert, whether you want to believe it or not. So as an experienced legislative staffer, you, Liz, have led efforts to advance the master plan through policy change. And I think it's fair to say that you've witnessed how aging and disability issues struggle to get the attention that they always deserve in the broader policy discussion. A lot of people attribute the sometimes lack of attention to these issues and investment in these issues to underlying issues of ageism and ableism that really are reflective not just of our policy environment, but our society as a whole. So I know that prior to your role at the Assembly Committee on Aging, you were the lead consultant to the Legislative Women's Caucus. So I would be curious to hear what lessons you think that this community can learn from the broader advocacy community, and how can we utilize our tools with advocacy to really change this paradigm and to, we've seen tremendous leadership and investments in aging and disability the last few years, but I think we all recognize there's a lot more that we need, and there's a lot more that needs to be done, and we're by nowhere close to where we need to be. So how can we kind of change this conversation, better educate and engage the broader legislative leaders?
Wow. Thank you for your very, very kind introduction. I think that one, I just to cap a little bit on what Andy just said, that I think one area that is really, really important to recognize is this is a space where we're starting on a higher level. The level of desire to want to work together and the intention to want to work together is there. And so I feel like we are already starting as kind of to frame and to say this, how can we? We can't, because we've gotten past the first hurdle, which is we want to. We have a great intention to. I do want to thank everyone has had this love fest of one another, but I think that I came to an aging space, and I have said this 1,000 times on these platforms, but my very first day on my job was the first master plan meeting. And I had come from a space of being really good at what I did, and I really understood the subject matter. And I came into this room with these learned masters because you have dedicated your life's work to this space. And it was terrifying. I drove home, I cried and thought I've made a terrible mistake by leaving a job that I knew and that I was really comfortable in. And I think that the growth that you can have is really starting something that's different. And I certainly recognized in the last 2.5 years that I am where I'm meant to be. I have a great passion in the caregiving space. Certainly, Sarah Steenhausen, you know, I will forever call you a shero and a friend because I think you're amazing, and we can all learn from one another. So exactly, if I could properly adorn some type of, you know, blingy T-shirts to meetings, I would. So I know that I looked at this question and I took some notes that I think we as policy consultants, primarily chief consultants in the assembly, have been tasked with looking at legislation with an equity lens. You talked a little bit about ableism, ageism. We are expected to address equity in our analysis. And yet when we came together and talked gender, absolutely, that's in my wheelhouse. I understand what they mean there. Communities of color, for some, that's going to be hard. And I think that I used to joke in the Women's Caucus that I would never have a bill before transportation because why? I mean, I could find a nexus to so many other committees. And yet one of the hardest bills that we ever moved had to move through transportation. So I think that you'll find there really is a key to how we can thread and find ourselves connected to all of these different policy areas. But with my colleagues, when I asked the question, well, are we also going to address how this would impact people with disabilities and older Californians? That it almost popped the noggins off of everyone because that seemed too much. It seemed really hard. And so we do have work in helping people understand that we're not asking you to say that every bill must impact people with disabilities and must impact the lives of older Californians. Simply what we're saying, and certainly when you have a bill that impacts K-12 education, there may not be. But when we're talking about housing, and if this prioritizes, and you're saying it must prioritize the most vulnerable populations, but you're making that households with young families, you've forgotten that there is the fastest growing population. You're forgetting, you know, we have a piece of legislation that the chair is working on now that really addresses what do we mean by vulnerable populations. And so I think, as Andy said, sometimes there's a real fear that you're going to do something wrong. And in the political space, that fear is exacerbated because in a state of social media, you do something wrong, it is not forgiven. It is forever. And it's a very, very scary space to be in. And so I think often it's just, I won't go into that space. I will steer clear of it and stick with something that's comfortable. Sarah mentioned that when you disagree, it's a good thing. And I can't agree with that more because as it forces the listening, that's how we also learn. That's how we also broaden that knowledge that we come with. And so I think that as that has been asked of me as a policy consultant, I think that it's all of our jobs as advocates, because while I have a job that has me oversee this policy area, I think I really am seeing that in this policy area, I also have to be an advocate, and I can't take that hat off, because if I wasn't, then I really shouldn't be in the job that I'm in, or I won't be as impactful in the job that I'm in. I do think that rightfully so and gratefully so, we are riding a wave right now. I think that the policy issues that impact us, are really important. And we have to keep moving that forward. I don't want anyone to say, well, we've had our turn, we're going to get back in line. It's that we have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to have these issues constantly be something that are well thought through. I think the fact that the governor finally has someone that is addressing issues with this lens is really important. And it says something about not only this administration, but hopefully moving forward. I can't imagine that a governor's office in the future would be able to say, well, we don't really need this. Mm-hmm. So I think that we're in a very, very good space. I think that what we do have to learn, though, is that we can't keep using the old ways to fight this fight now in 2022. Mm-hmm. And that comes a little bit about understanding that do we need legislation or do we need budget asks? And a lot of people have constantly thought that we need it to be a bill. And I think that what we're learning is the recovery from 2009 for many people never happened. And what we do know is on the books, there are some really great mandates, but if they're not properly funded, then it doesn't matter how many more bills we have. If they're not properly funded, then they can't properly function. So I think that we need to be even more intentional with the bills that we choose to do. And that's because we've seen in the last year or so that when we have had some scaling back of how many bills we're going to move to the other house or being concerned about how many bills we're going to introduce, if you have a 12 bill limit, your aging bill, perhaps your disability bill, is going to be number 13. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to be ever mindful of moving things with intention, not just in numbers. Mm-hmm. Because with intention, that goes a little bit towards what did I learn from my time with the caucus. And that is really about the importance of collaboration. And the master plan gave you all that foundation. They gave this opportunity to work together to build something with that idea of the greater good. And Andy, I get distracted with chats. Nothing about us without us. I love that idea. I love this idea that everybody is moving something forward. But I think that also means that while something is in the master plan, it doesn't mean that we need to move it all at once. I think if we could have some agreement around what are the biggest of the biggest lifts, what do we need now to build this foundation, and that while everyone is working collaboratively and cohesively together, if you can trust one another, and if you can move forward some of the biggest, knowing that something else that's very important to you can come after that, I really think we need to anticipate that someone's going to be asking, but when are my needs met? If I support you now, when will my needs be met? And that really goes to an understanding of trust inside of a collaboration. But I saw that, and the greatest gains that we ever had were in childcare. When I worked with the Women's Caucus, was understanding that we had to address workforce issues before we could address rates and payments. Because if we didn't have enough people to do the job, then it didn't matter how much we were paying, because we weren't meeting the needs. And I think there's a lot of applicability there to say, what are the needs of this group? How do we build this foundation? And then how do we continue to layer?
Yeah. So, I think that that's such an important point to consider in this discussion right now, because I do recall in the development of the master plan in the LTSS subcommittee, we had challenges because we had 35 key priorities, right? And it really was difficult to focus. And there are some that end up rising to the top, but I want to build on something you said, which is the more that you can coordinate that advocacy and focus priorities across all of the different interest groups, the more powerful it can be. So at this time, as we move into beyond year 2 of the MPA, there were some questions about what is this event on the 20th and what does that mean? I think it ties exactly into what you're saying, Liz. At that event, we want to hear from our stakeholder committees, and we want to hear platforms that they develop that are their highest priorities. And something that I'm also seeing now that I'm no longer on the outside of being a stakeholder, I'm on the inside being a stakeholder and an advocate from this space, right? But what is so helpful is when stakeholders not only point out the policy problem, but they have a very defined solution. A lot of the times you can just say, build the workforce. We don't, it's a very challenging problem to address. But when people come forth with the specific proposals that say, this is how we can do it, and this is how we can utilize the funds, it's very helpful. So we want to use that event on the 20th as a time for you all to come together in your respective groups, all of the different stakeholder committees, and develop the platforms. But we expect this will be a lot of work. It's not going to be an easy project. And we expect that, over the next few months, this is when our stakeholders will be working on it and having those internal debates, dialogues, where there will be a lot of disagreement about what should be the priority. Not saying that you just pick one and we'll have a certain template to follow, but again, I think this again gets into the role that we all play with leadership, and stakeholders need to lead and bring us their fleshed out ideas to help inform the next iteration of the plan. So lots to talk about there, but I want to turn, we're going to bring on Cheryl Brown in a few minutes, not quite yet, because we're excited to hear from her and reflect on all this. But Debbie and Andy, with Liz just, touched on so many issues that the legislature is dealing with. And the fact is, when you have limits to the bill load of 12 or so bills that you can introduce, the aging and disability bills don't always rise to the top. What are your thoughts on, first, what are the biggest issues that have an aging and disability lens that we need to bring to the top, and how do we do that? Debbie, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Andy.
Transportation. If you give somebody a house and a roof over their head, but you don't give them or allow them to get to the grocery store or their doctor's appointments or their place of worship or to see their grandkids or whatever, they're not going to be able to take advantage of that house for very long. This is so radically underinvested in, and we have what you outlined, Sarah. We have aging and disability. We have the California Collaborative. We have these groups that represent aging and disability coming together and prioritizing this as an issue area, and we have a solution. Take the Consolidated Transportation Services Agency Act, modernize that legislation, and fund it. I mean, it exists. It's in writing. We know what to do. Like, we have the solution. We have the people. We have the voice. But yes, we're 13. So
yeah, but, to your, Debbie, you've done an amazing job on the Disability and Aging Community Living Advisory Council by focusing on transportation and by doing exactly what we're talking about, which is bringing examples. First, really powerfully defining the problem. And you did that by bringing people to the committee to talk about what it's like and lived experience, right? Second, you're now offering these specific policy solutions. And what I would say is, okay, stakeholders get together and you talk about modernizing CTSA, actually draft that. What does that look like? Hand feed it to the administration. I'm not saying, oh yeah, then you do it, it'll happen, but at least it gives something to work from. And I know we've talked about that, but this is why it's exciting to see groups like DACLAC have these subcommittees that actually are focusing their efforts on fleshing out what they think needs to happen, rather than using the time for stakeholder engagements to have the state presenting to all of you. So just can't speak enough to that.
One little tiny problem with that is that we lost our two of our best policy authors, Sarah Steenhausen and Susan DeMorris.
No, you've got lots of good people. You've got lots.
We do. We have tons of good people, but our two primary writers, they're doing great stuff, though.
Well, so Andy, I'd love to hear from you. What are your what do you think if you could do something this year and elevate a certain policy issue? Obviously, there's so many, but what do you feel like is really the most cross-cutting right now?
Well, I had a chance to speak at the SCAN Foundation event last summer about the state of the state for aging. And I tried to come up with one sentence. And I said, we're rich, we're on fire, and we're way too comfortable with inequality. And I guess from my perspective, the cross-cutting issue is the inequality issue. And the strongest voices on that issue in our state right now, I would say, are labor, the faith community, and the civil rights community, the community that's focused on equity and social justice. So, going back to Debbie's point about the direct support workforce, the reason we don't pay the direct support workforce well is it's mostly women and mostly immigrants. And there's discrimination embedded in that. And the most powerful group that can help us change that is the labor movement. And the labor movement in California has a lot more power and influence and capacity to make policy happen than sometimes is possible at the national level. So I feel like there's an opportunity for us in California to solve some of these problems that are national problems and bring together everybody who's concerned about inequality. Our state has some of the richest people in the world and living not far from people who are homeless. And we have to expose that as an immoral thing. And we need to talk about it in terms of morality. And I just feel like that conversation is the conversation that we need to have as a state.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've heard a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of the comments come in about just everybody echoing how critical it is to address these issues, including especially the workforce and getting a living wage and paying our direct care workers what they deserve, but also saying, we don't have the accessible transportation that's needed at the local level. That impacts not only older adults and people with disabilities who need to get to services, but it also impacts that direct care workforce that can't get to the jobs, right, that they need to be getting to. So a lot of just support for these themes that are being raised. What I think we should do, because we don't have a ton of time, I want to add a fifth panelist in, and I want to keep this discussion going. Cheryl Brown, former Assembly member and current member of the Commission on Aging, is here to kind of be our call to action. But before you go to closing remarks, because we still have time and I want to get into more policy issues, I thought, Cheryl, it would be great to pull you in right now as we're in the middle of this conversation. As a former legislator, you have a really important perspective on what it's like to advocate for these issues internally when there are many other pressing issues that the legislature is facing, right? And being the one that's trying to constantly beat the drum on these issues and get attention focused on it. But you also have the personal lived experience as being a caregiver of your husband for so many years, who has had disability for a long time, and you've been a dedicated family caregiver to him. So you understand what it's like to try and weave together the services and support. So I would love your thoughts right now on what you see as the most critical issues right now and how we continue to get the attention we need and build the legislative leadership that we need to keep the dialogue going.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been the most wonderful panel discussion, and I've enjoyed each and every one. Andy, Debbie, and Liz, and yourself, Sarah. Whenever I sit and I think about what, as a legislator, what would I want to have happen now? First of all, there is the BC before all these MPA came about, and then there's now the after it's come about, and how you take that work. Don't forget what happened in the past, because SSI and SSP, that was one of the most disappointing things to me, that we could not give seniors, I think it was $5 more or $20 more. The governor told me, no, that is $3 billion. We don't have that kind of money. That wasn't Governor Newsom either. But that was the thought, that we couldn't give these seniors back what they had before 2009. So for this conversation and for us to go now to MPA is just exciting. I was listening to Debbie talk about lifting up the workforce, and that is a must. But you have to lift up not only the paid workforce, but also those family caregivers. we haven't had much discussion about family caregivers, but there's things that we need to be about in helping them to have a better life as well. Many of them have to quit their jobs, come home to take care of that loved one. I happen to be taking care of my husband, but I'm also taking care of my aunt who is in early stages of dementia, who lives around the corner from me. So it is, it's something that we need to really focus on in those family caregivers. Remember, family caregivers give up $47 billion in free labor.
Yeah.
And we save that. The other thing Andy talked about, building aging disability community for all. That was just how we came into that. I don't even know, but I know that he and Christina, I can't think of Christina's last name,
Mills.
but Mills. Okay.
Mills, yeah.
He and Christina Mills just took the blinders off of everyone's eyes and said, this is important. And we learned how to work together on that MPA because of the people who were involved and because of he and Christina and others. The other thing I looked at was Liz. I'd like to take a different tack and say, I love what you had to say about getting these big things out of the way. But sometimes when you're in legislation, you can't get those big things, but you can get smaller, low-hanging fruit. So we really do need a two-pronged approach where we would get the big stuff going and then see what we can do about knocking down that low-hanging fruit.
That's a great point.
Yeah. I am now on the federal legislation side for the California Commission on Aging. So I'm the chair. And so, Andy, I'll be looking more at that work as well. And I am excited about what we have done with the master plan for aging in the state of California. The last thing I'd like to say is you were talking about how we work together and how we, people didn't fight each other and so forth and so on. We didn't start out that way.
Right.
We started out with people coming in with their own agendas. And we could see that early on when we were meeting face to face. And we said, I don't think this is going to work. If we're here for your group and we're here for your group, we said we have to be here for our group. And our group are those people so that we'll have a California for all, starting from birth until death. That California for all is what that is.
Yeah, that's a really great message, Cheryl. And I think that, and I think sometimes groups or individual stakeholders might think that means letting go of everything that matters to you and just focusing on one or two things, but it doesn't. It means really, really, really working closely on those really top critical issues and coming in with a unified voice to the legislature, because I hear what you're saying, which is I remember when you met with a group of stakeholders when you were first elected and chair of Assembly Aging and Long-Term Care Committee, and you came in and said, people, get it together. You need to be more unified in your message. I'm hearing from all these different groups. I can't even keep all of you straight of all the different things that you're doing. It sounds like you're all doing the same thing, but you're bringing different proposals forward. So I think we've come a long way, and that's really exciting. But one specific policy issue that I think ties into so many different areas, fighting poverty and equity issues and disability and aging, is that of long-term care financing and how we ensure that people don't have to impoverish themselves at all ages to qualify for the care and support they need on Medi-Cal. Something that struck me as a comment that I got in the questions where somebody said, it's great to talk about raising the living wage, but what about those of us who are paying privately for home care? And then when you raise that living wage, then we have to pay. The private pay has to pay. And then they too can't afford the increase in wages. So it's kind of a domino effect. And it brings up the issue of how we pay for long-term care. And Liz and others, I know that there's been a lot of discussion through the California Aging and Disability Alliance to develop a publicly financed long-term care benefit. There's legislation moving forward. There's the Long-Term Care Insurance Task Force. I would love to hear, particularly from you, Liz, and others, what are your thoughts on how we move forward right now with this really, really big challenge we face of how we finance long-term care?
That is an excellent question. And it is a question I think needs, again, that is an enormous lift. If this were to be something that we're coming as a benefit through the state, I think first we have to identify, what does this look like? We've had lots of different discussions. I think that, to begin, sometimes we need to ensure inclusivity. And so when we've done research or asked for actuarial studies, we need to know who would be using it right now. We need to ensure that we're including people with disabilities. We need to be ensuring that that we're getting an actual view of what we need. And so sometimes it may be acknowledging that, hey, some of the studies that we heard didn't include everyone. We need to go back and ensure that we're doing a little more research. I think that actually your question encapsulates everything that everyone has talked about. You can't bring a proposal that still has some empty spaces, because it's the empty spaces in that piece of legislation that are the most important and the most impactful. Mm-hmm. So I also think, because we have a lot of different spaces where people are working on this, what are they working on? I know that the task force and the insurance commissioners space is expected to give a report back in January, but then there's another report that follows the following year. What would we anticipate is going to be different? Why the two? I think to a certain degree there's some greater understanding that we need. I think that you have legislators that are hungry to work in this space, because legislators are here for a longer period of time. We have to recognize that we're going to start this process, and it's not going to happen day one. It's not going to be an easy move. And there may need to be, it may need to come in a package of multiple different steps and multiple different pieces that all move together. And I think that when we talk about, again, when we're talking about what does it look like, I don't know if everyone can agree what it needs to look like. And that's where we have to start.
Andy, it looks like did you want to respond to that too? Because it's a great point.
I guess I just want to say that I don't believe that we've laid the foundation politically. Like, from my perspective, we have a consensus as a state that climate change is a crisis. We have a consensus as a state that homelessness is a crisis. We don't have a consensus as a state that our long-term care system is a crisis, because most people in the state don't even understand what we have. You don't know that it's broken until you need it. So I just want to emphasize the importance of a communication strategy to help the average Californian understand that this is as big a crisis as homelessness or climate change. And right now, I don't think people understand that.
Yeah, wonderful point. We have 2 minutes left. I could talk with all of you all day long easily, and can't wait to see everybody in person one of these days soon. But we have 2 minutes. I want you to leave us with one word. That this is how we ended the panel a few years ago, if you remember, at the Senior Advocacy Day. One word that encapsulates how you feel now about these issues and what you see, for the potential moving forward. So for me, I am going to say collaboration is what I really feel and sense with this community, and a lot of potential for more system change that is positive. Andy.
Leadership.
Okay. Debbie.
Imperative.
Okay. Liz.
I'm inspired.
Great. And Cheryl.
Liz took my word. I am so inspired, especially knowing that you young people are in this space, because as we are getting older, you're getting older also. But as we're getting older, we do need inspiration to continue this fight and keep doing what you're doing. I am so excited.
Great. Well, we have a lot of work to do over the next 8 years of the master plan. So I think we really are just getting started. We're going to have a lot more time for uncomfortable conversations that eventually lead to very positive change. So I want to thank you all, Andy, Debbie, Liz, and Cheryl, for being here. You guys have been amazing, thoughtful contributors to this discussion, and let's get our work. Let's keep it going and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll hand it back to you, Kevin. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Liz and Andy and Debbie and Cheryl. It's been such a pleasure to get to work closely with you all. And we're so proud and so impressed and inspired by all the good work that you've done and are continuing to do. So thanks for being with us today, and thanks for all that you're doing. We're getting close to the end of this presentation part of the Rally Day. I want to talk to you about the advocacy program that's going to begin at 1 o'clock today. The advocacy program is going to go from 1 o'clock to 3:30. This portion of the program is going to bring legislatures and other representatives and advocates together with Senior Rally Day participants. Each of the presenters in the afternoon are going to speak about a bill or budget request that they're promoting this year. There's going to be 10 presentations, and each presenter is going to present for about 15 minutes. There's a whole schedule for the advocacy program. You can find that in the materials tab on the toolbar of the Senior Rally Day lobby room. There's a document in there that identifies each of the pieces of legislation and each of the budget asks that are going to be covered during that advocacy program, with information about who's going to speak about each of them. So we'd like you to, we're going to go to a break here in a little while, but at 12:45, we'd like you to navigate to the advocacy meeting tab that's on the toolbar of the main lobby page. You can click the link in the center of that page, and it'll take you to the advocacy program. So 12:45, navigate to the advocacy meeting tab on the toolbar. That toolbar is on the main lobby page for the event. And then click the link in the center of the page, and that'll take you to the advocacy program. So hopefully that is clear and makes sense. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this first part of the program today. I really want to thank our presenters. It was so generous of people to spend their time with us today. Kim and Susan, and I'm not going to remember everybody because I don't have their name. Adam and Maria's beautiful comments, and then that panel that we just had with Sarah and Cheryl and Andy and Liz and Debbie. You really saw so many people that have really dedicated their careers to issues of aging and disability, and now we're working together in new and different ways to make progress. So really thankful to have them to inspire us and give us direction for the day. This concludes the presentation portion of the program. We are going to take a lunch break. During the lunch break, please take an opportunity to revisit the lobby where you can view legislator messages as well as the exhibitors. I really want to thank again our sponsors and our exhibitors that make this event possible. And then take your lunch break, take some time away from the screen too, and then come back together at 1 o'clock. And that's when the advocacy program is going to begin. Again, you'll need to navigate to the advocacy meeting tab on the toolbar on the Senior Rally Day main lobby page, and then click on the link, and that'll direct you to the advocacy program. I'm just going to see if there's any other notes from our organizers today, but I think we are good. So I want to thank you all for being with us, and please come back and join us at 1 o'clock. Thanks.